Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig is an outspoken critic of the way political campaigns are funded in this country. This was him back in 2011, lambasting the Citizens United Supreme Court decision that lifted restrictions on corporate spending in politics.
The funders say dance, and they dance, and we produce this marionette Congress, a system which Professor James Sample describes filled with junkies.
Well, that was then, and this was Lawrence Lessig just last week announcing his latest online venture.
We want to build a super PAC big enough to end all super PACs. Our goal for this election cycle is to raise enough money to change the results in 5 House districts across the country.
Confused? So here you have a campaign finance crusader soliciting money for the purpose of influencing elections. The irony, of course, is not lost on Lessig, who is here tonight to explain what is this PAC all about.
Well, the hope of this PAC, a super PAC to end all super PACs, citizen-funded, crowdsourced in the funding, is to find a way to elect a Congress that wants to pass fundamental reform, to change the way we raise money in elections. Right now, it's the tiniest fraction of the 1%, maybe 0.05% of Americans, who are the relevant funders of campaigns. And that produces a Congress that bends to keep them happy and increasingly is not so interested in keeping America happy.
All right, first I want to talk about how you raise the money and then what you're going to do with it. So you launched this campaign May 1st. Already you've raised $500,000. It's pretty amazing. You're 51% of your goals. You got another 500. You got 24 days left. You're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So once you get the 1 million, then what happens?
So when we get the 1 million, we're going to get that matched.
Who's going to match it?
Well, we're not going to announce the match until it's committed,
Okay.
but it will be a split match that'll make it clear that this is not a partisan project. Then we're going to run a $5 million Kickstarter. So with these Kickstarter-like campaigns, you only have to pay if we meet our goal. So if we don't meet our goal, your card's not charged, but if we do meet our goal, then we can go forward. And we'll get that $5 million matched. And then we'll have the money we need to run the really prototype campaign that we want to run this cycle, to demonstrate this issue is important to Americans, to figure out how to win in the elections we need to win, and to set us up for a much, much bigger campaign in 2016.
How are you going to identify people who agree with you, who think that sincerely campaign finance reform must change? What's to say that they wouldn't agree with you to get your money, and then when it comes down to it, they're not going to make that vote in Congress?
Yeah, that's a hard problem. I mean, the fact is that many people have lost faith that you can trust anything that they say. But we're picking candidates that we believe will set up the issue clearly. So it's black and white. One side is fundamentally in favor of reform, and the other side isn't. And it'll be very hard for that person to back away once they've committed to that reform. They've got to promise to co-sponsor the fundamental reform. And we'll set this up so that people see this is a campaign about that. And when we win in these 5 races, we'll have a very strong message going into 2016 to say to the rest of Congress, look, we're going to be back, and you better be on the right side of the issue when we come back.
Now, I know there's a little bit tongue-in-cheek over this, so a little bit, but do you feel smarmy at all doing it this way after you've been such a vocal critic of the way the process works?
No, I don't feel swarmy. It's ironic, but we have to embrace the irony. You know, we're a nation of Colbert and the Daily Show. We can be ironic about it, but the reality is the only way we will rally Americans is if we give them a sense that we can win on this issue. You know, we found in our polling the vast majority of Americans, more than 90%, believe that the influence of money in politics needs to be reduced. But about the same number don't think it's possible. But if we give them a sense that it is possible by having a campaign that's effective and big enough that it can win, a moonshot for this kind of reform, we can rally them to demand it in their Congress people and begin to try to get it. Now, you know, if we were trying to set up a super PAC for the next 30 years, try to get policies we want, I would feel pretty icky about that. But we're setting up a super PAC to try to make sure everyone has the influence, the equal influence that a political system in a democracy is supposed to grant them.
What is your fundamental problem with the way it works now? I know a lot of campaigns, even in this state, for heaven's sake, just excessive amounts of money were spent, but some would argue the end result was worth it. What's your problem with the way the process works?
I don't think the problem is the spending. The problem is the way the money is raised. Look, when you have members of Congress spending 30 to 70% of their time raising money, dialing for dollars from the tiniest fraction of the 1%, that can't help but bend them, to shift them, to build a sixth sense inside them about how what they do will affect their ability to raise money. It becomes like a green primary, where they have to pass the green primary to get enough money to run in the general election. And so they're incredibly sensitive to what the funders in that green primary want. And that's the essence of the corruption of the current system. But that suggests a pretty simple solution to the problem: to shift this funding from this tiny fraction of the 1% to spread it out among a wider range of Americans. And there are Republican proposals for doing that, and there are Democratic proposals for doing that. John Sarbanes from Maryland has a Government by the People Act, which is a very aggressive match for small contributions. So if you give $100, it turns out to be $1,000 inside the campaign. These are all ways to make sure that the wide range of Americans are participating in the funding, and this tiny fraction doesn't have the kind of veto that control that they have over the government right now.
Are you also making, in your own way, an argument for term limits?
You know, I would support term limits as part of a package to change the way we fund elections. But one of the problems with the current system right now is that we have almost self-imposed term limits as members look at K Street, where the lobbyists live, and think, boy, I can make a lot more money if I went to work for K Street. So they're very interested in spending the time that they can on Capitol Hill and then making their move off of Capitol Hill to earn the money that they would as a lobbyist. Now, that itself is a kind of corruption of the system, and that will not change either until we change the way we fund elections. So that's why changing the funding of elections is, I think, the first issue we have to address, and that's what we're trying to do.
The Supreme Court made the ultimate decision with Citizens United, and unless, I don't know how you're going to elect people who are going to overturn that unless they, you know, there's some pressure on the White House to put different people into, but, I mean, would you go after that? Would you try to get that ruling changed?
Well, we can change the way we fund elections without changing the Supreme Court. So that's the first thing we can do. The court has upheld these kinds of funding systems, and that's what we should be pushing. I'm actually pretty confident that my former dean, Elena Kagan, will wrestle them to the ground and get them to the right answer on this issue. The Supreme Court never holds out far from the mainstream of political action for very long. So I think eventually they're going to come around. But if they don't, then, of course, we've got to earn the right to restore confidence back into our government. And that might mean taking on the court either through an amendment or through presidential appointments that make that possible. But the first critical thing, independent of the court, is to get a movement to change the way we fund elections so members can focus on the public and not on their funders.
All right, we will be following this as it happens. Get to the end of the month, we'll see what happens. All right.
Thank you.
Lawrence Lessig, always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.